Something's happening now. All right. Are we live? I think we are live. Let me just quickly check our Facebook. Yes, we are live. Let me just open this. There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maritza, and I will be your host for today's Q&A with Prof. Prof, I don't see you online. Are we online?
I'm here. I can see you, Maritza.
All right, let's see. Maybe somebody will comment to see if we are online. Good afternoon. There we go. Yes. Good afternoon, Graham. So we've got a few announcements just quickly. So as you all know, we are having our celebrations, 10 years of challenging beliefs. What an amazing journey. So the event will be on the 18th of April at the Kajee Hotel. It will start at 9 a.m. and will be done at 12 p.m. Our famous and only Prof will be our keynote speaker. It's going to be a fantastic morning. We've got a few more tickets left. So for those who are interested to join us, please do so. And yes, so from the other side, Nutrition Network would just like to say, on the 30th of March, it will be International Doctors' Day. So they would like to give commemoration to Dr. Hassina and Dr. Neville for all their hard work, providing all the training and helping with the books and all of those things. So they are having a little 20% discount special on their ketogenic textbook. I will put all of this in our links. There's also 2 blog posts that I will add for those who are interested in reading more about it. Prof, anything from your side?
Yeah, Maritza. So firstly, about the 10-year anniversary, I've been working on my talk, and it's just getting better and better and better and longer. So when you said we're going to end by 12 o'clock, well, we might just run over a bit because I think people know once I start talking, I can talk a long time. But it's 10 years, and it's astonishing what's happened in those 10 years.
It is amazing what happened in those 10 years. Yes, definitely. Yeah. But we're not in a rush. We're not in a rush. We'll just have some more coffee. That's all we'll do.
And so I don't know what's going to happen in another 10 years' time. I might not be here, so I'm making the best of this opportunity to say what the story has been for the last 10 years. And it just gets better. And why does it get better? Because this morning I received a email from my great friend, Dr. Peter Bruckner. And Peter and I have known each other since the 1980s. And originally we were often at loggerheads because he's Australian and involved in sports medicine, and I'm in South Africa, also involved in sports medicine. And Peter became very famous as the doctor for the Liverpool Football Club, but even more so for the Australian cricket team.
Oh, wow.
And he writes in the British Journal of Sports Medicine that he saw I'd changed my diet in 2011. And he said, well, Noakes often knows what he's talking about, although he's quite maverick. And Peter was a little overweight like I was. And he said, well, I can only try. So he changed his diet. He slims down. And then he's on tour with the Australian cricket team in England in the Ashes tour. And the Australians were getting beaten 5-0. They lost the series 5-0, which is an embarrassment for them because the Ashes is the most famous cricket competition in the world. And anyway, one day he's reading a textbook on the low-carb diet. I think it was Good Calories, Bad Calories. And Shane Watson, who was one of the key Australian players, came up and says, Doc, what are you reading? So he says, no, I'm reading this new book about this low-carb diet and it's how it's meant to help people with diabetes. So Shane says, you know, it's interesting. My dad has type 2 diabetes and I've always struggled with my weight. I can't eat any food and I just put on weight. And so he says, should I try the diet? So of course, Shane Watson tries the diet. By the end of the series, 4 of the key Australian players are following the diet.
Oh, well
They
done.
then go to Australia and play the reverse Ashes in Australia, and they win 5-0. And then they go and win the World Cup as well. So I'm not claiming that it was the low carb diet, but what's really interesting,
Wow. Wow.
when Peter comes back to Australia, he starts realizing that he must do more for diabetes. And he writes a book on diabetes. And today he wrote to me to say that the first country in the world where a low carbohydrate diet will become the official diet of the Australian Diabetes Association.
Oh, well
That,
done.
that he will be working in collaboration with the Australian Diabetes Association. And that's so exciting.
Sure.
You know, the story about being a prophet. So Australia will change their diets, but not South Africa, where the idea arose.
We will
So
get there. We will learn.
that's one of the themes of the talk will be that the greatest pandemic that we face is not a virus. It is the obesity diabetes pandemic, and governments will do nothing about it. They just see this disaster ahead of them and they pretend it doesn't matter, and they get our eyes focused on something that is largely much less important. And it's time we took back control.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. So
Yes.
that's, and just by the by, I went last night to a movie which was shot or co-directed by the lady who does all the filming for the Nutrition Network, Lee Wood. And it's about the Amapa people in the Eastern Cape who stood up to Shell. There were literally less than 1,000 of these people, of this clan. They stood up to Shell, and Shell was wanting to do certain exploration for oil off the coast. And they used the South African Constitution, which is the most robust constitution in the world, to say to stop Shell, which had been given all the rights by the government to go ahead, but had never consulted anyone. They said, no, you can't. The South African Constitution says these people have a right to this land and their spirituality, and it involves the water because that's part of their ethos in life is looking after the water as well as the land. And they won the case. And so it's when people stand up to governments that we can get things done. And that's what we have to do on this diabetes story.
Yeah, I agree. Definitely. Because at the end of the day, I from my side, I mean, I still have small children. So we have to leave a legacy for them that they live past a certain age. Otherwise, will never see the age of 70 if we do not change our
That's
diet.
absolutely right. That's absolutely right.
So just to say hi to everyone, Graham is saying hi. Janice Peters is saying hi. Claus is saying hi from Brazil. Vilma is saying hi. Thank you guys for all joining us. We have Eat Better South Africa is also on the line. Hi, Yvette. Poppy is also here. So there's a lot of people today, Prof. So I think we're going to jump right into the questions. We're going to do a few of the last questions we missed. And then we will go for the new ones as well. So from Belinda here, she says, I follow a strict keto lifestyle and I'm a cyclist. What can I consume if I do a TT on endurance ride or a 24-hour?
Belinda, thank you so much for that question. So we've just completed a study with the group Philip Prince in Philadelphia, where we tried to answer the question, what's more important, the carbohydrates you eat before the race, i.e. in the week before, or the carbohydrates you eat during the race? And I can't give you the full details, but we compared people who were eating 360 grams of carbohydrate a day. That's a moderately high carbohydrate diet. It's nowhere near as high as some people eat, some world-class cyclists. So we compared 360 grams of carbohydrate a day for 6 weeks versus 10 grams per hour. Okay, 10 grams per hour during a 2 to 3 hour event. So it was taking 360 grams of carbohydrate the day before the race, or taking 20 to 30 grams during a 2 to 3 hour cycling event. And the findings were absolutely robust. What you ate before had no impact whatsoever on your performance. You could eat your 360 grams of carbohydrate and made no difference compared to when you took 40 grams. So eating an extra 320 grams of carbohydrate a day for 6 weeks did not alter performance compared to eating 40 grams of carbohydrate per day. But taking 10 grams an hour during 2 to 3 hours exercise made a massive difference. Massive difference. So the answer, Belinda, is, and this you will not find in any textbook because this data is absolutely novel, because we're the first to say, well, let's compare the one way to the other way. And it's clear that it's what you take in during the race that's much more important than what you took before. And the reason is your blood glucose level cannot be sustained during prolonged exercise unless you are uniquely adapted. There are some individuals who can cycle for a long time without taking any carbohydrate, but they are very uncommon. What happens during prolonged exercise is that the muscles continue to take glucose from the bloodstream. And the liver has got only a certain amount stored before you begin the race, and then it can only produce a certain amount. And there's a crossover point where the liver cannot produce as much as the muscles are using, and then your blood glucose levels start to fall. Now, as soon as that happens, the brain is not stupid. The brain needs glucose. And so it says, we've got a problem. If I allow you to continue exercising at this intensity, you're going to deplete the blood glucose concentration, and the brain is going to be affected. And because if your blood glucose falls to zero, you unfortunately die because you kill your brain cells. So the brain says, I'm not going to force the muscles to continue so that they kill the brain. So what happens is you slow down. And you see this progressive slowdown, and then eventually you stop. And while you're slowing down, you're getting these symptoms, I don't think I can finish the race, and these other features. You get a lot of discomfort. And that all tells you that your blood glucose level is falling. Now, if you take glucose during that period, or when you are feeling exhausted, you get a sudden rebound, your glucose shoots up, and you can continue for a certain period. You can't go on forever. Eventually, you run out and you become tired. And it's got nothing to do with carbohydrates. It's got nothing to do with fuel. It's brain fatigue, probably. So the answer for you, Belinda, is keep being a keto athlete. And the science shows you just need to take 10 grams of carbohydrate an hour, every hour that you're exercising, and you should be fine. If you start to slow down, you can increase it to 20 grams an hour and see what happens. If nothing happens, then it's not the carbohydrate that's the problem. You see, what's happened in the last 40 years is that industry has come in and made us believe that metabolism is the key driver of performance. And it's not. Performance is much more complex than that. And it's got a whole bunch of other things that are involved. And the brain is there. And the fatigue is directed by the brain. And it's one factor is your blood glucose falling, but it's one of only many factors. So you can correct that and prevent your blood glucose from falling, but ultimately you get tired, and there's no metabolic reason for that. For example, one of the ladies I influenced also to run, she read Law of Running. She just ran a world record for the 6-day event. So she ran 550 miles or something in 6 days. And it's astonishing. And she reported her food intake today or yesterday. And as she gets more tired, she eats more carbohydrate, but that doesn't make sense because as you get tired, your body slows down and you could burn more and more fat. Fat will provide all the energy you need. So why take in carbohydrates? It doesn't make sense. As you're getting more tired, it's because it's something else. It's completely unrelated to what you're eating. So you don't have to eat. You could just burn your own fat cells. And as long as you're taking your 10 grams an hour, you'll be fine. So we've got this paradox that the longer you go, they're now saying you must eat more carbohydrate when as you go further, you burn more and more fat. You don't need carbohydrates. And we can't get past that. The argument is that you can't move unless you've got carbohydrates, and that's nonsense. Once you slow down, you can do extremely well just burning fat.
Oh, thanks, Prof. What an answer. So from Jody, Jody said that she has been recently put on blood thinners and beta blockers for arterial fibrillation condition. And her cardiologist said that she needs to stay away from processed meat, including bacon. So bacon is her main source for her low carb, high fat lifestyle. And she wanted to know, is all bacon unhealthy?
Yeah, Jody. So, we're up against this problem that saturated fat causes heart disease, and it's got no evidence whatsoever that it does, but that's become ingrained in medicine. And one of the features of my talk at the 10th anniversary is where it all went wrong. And it went wrong because the first people, a guy called Ansel Keys, was not a medical doctor and he wasn't a proper scientist. And they made two major errors. They had this data which showed a linear relationship between increasing fat in the diet and heart disease rates. And that's called an associational relationship. An association does not prove causation. But because the scientists of the 1950s didn't understand that, they were tricked, and they have continued to be tricked to this very day. That's the first one. And the only way you can prove causation is you have to do a randomized controlled trial. But you have to test the theory that you have. You have to try to disprove it. And no one's done that. Or when they have done it and they've disproved it, they've hidden the data, as I also I'll show at the talk at the 10-year anniversary. So, unfortunately, Jody, your cardiologist still believes the causation, that association proves causation, and it doesn't. And the cause of heart disease is diabetes, 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 diabetes. That's it. It's got nothing to do with cholesterol. It's all to do with abnormal blood glucose regulation, high insulin levels, high glucose, and visceral obesity. Those are the markers of risk of arterial disease. Cholesterol has nothing to do with it. And so you can eat all the bacon you like, and it doesn't matter that it's processed at all. That's not the issue. Bacon has got no link whatsoever to arterial disease. But fruit and high starch, ultra processed foods, those are the things that are causing the problem. So please, you don't need to listen to that. You need to check if you're pre-diabetic, and you need to treat the diabetes if you have diabetes. And you're already doing that by bringing your blood glucose concentration down. So I'd be interested to know how anyone knows you've got arterial disease. Have you had a coronary angiogram? And if so, what were the results like? Or is it speculation that, because your cholesterol's high, you've got arterial disease? So those are the questions. But I can tell you, whatever your condition is, even if you have arterial disease, the treatment is a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, and bacon can be part of that diet.
Fantastic. Right. Thanks, Prof. That's also a very good question. So from Erin, they would like to know, how long does it take to become fat adapted? And do you become fat adapted when you are in ketosis?
Thanks, Erin, for that question. Okay, I'll tell you what my belief is, that humans are naturally fat adapted, that is the natural state. And we developed that state because we evolved, or God made us as carnivores. And we changed over the years as we started to eat more cereals and grains about 18,000 years ago. And then with the ultra-processed foods, which came around in the last 10 or 15 years, we completely changed our metabolism from being fat-adapted fat burners to carbohydrate burners. But the biology is to be a fat burner. And we can see that because if you take a well-trained athlete and you stop feeding them carbohydrates, within 4 days, they switch over completely to being fat-adapted fat burners, despite the fact that they've never actually trained the system, because they've always trained the carbohydrates, when you're eating a high carbohydrate diet, you're carbohydrate dependent. So the systems you are adapting are carbohydrates, not fats. Yet these athletes can start to burn fat at enormous rates within 4 or 5 days. So therefore, the underlying way we metabolize is to burn fat. But as soon as you put in carbohydrates into your diet and you store muscle glycogen, you store carbohydrates in the muscles as glycogen, the body says, now this is theory, but I think it's true. The body says, whoa, we got a problem. This stupid person is eating too much carbohydrate. And we're trying to get rid of it by storing it in the muscles rather than the bloodstream to keep the blood glucose normal. But this stupid person is going to go and eat more carbohydrates in 5 hours' time. So we must exercise and get rid of the carbohydrates to make room for the next onslaught. And that's what it is. It's an onslaught. It's a threat. Because the only way we can get around this threat is take the glucose out of the bloodstream and store it in the muscles. So what scientists like myself, stupid scientists like myself, we made the error. We watched people, we studied people doing high intensity exercise, and we fed them carbohydrates, and we found, gosh, they burn carbohydrates. So it must be good for you. You must be needing this. And only in the last 4 years did we have the courage to test that hypothesis. And that's the point. You must test your belief and try to disprove it, not to prove it. So we've had 30, 40 years of people proving their hypothesis, and no one was trying to disprove it. And so we came along. There were 1 or 2 people who tried to disprove it. Let's not forget them. But we came along and systematically said, we are going to disprove our hypothesis. We believe carbohydrates are good. We're going to disprove it. And we set out these studies, and every time we've done the study, it just shows exactly the same. You don't need carbohydrates. So my conclusion is that the carbohydrate is in the muscle because it's safer to put it in the muscle than leave it in the bloodstream. So you've got to get rid of it. And that's what the humans do. As soon as glucose appears in the bloodstream, there's this huge outpouring of insulin to try and get rid of it, get it out of the bloodstream, and you start to burn it, and you inhibit fat metabolism. So every time you take carbs, you inhibit your fat metabolism, which is the way humans are designed to burn fat, or to burn fuels. So that's my theory at the moment. So fat adaptation occurs very quickly. That doesn't mean to say performance changes occur very quickly. So that we don't know how long it takes for your performance to change if you adapt to a high-fat diet. The first week or two, some people really struggle. And I mean, I had one guy told me he couldn't get out of bed for a week when he went on the low-carb diet. So there is that variation. But most people, it's 5 or 6 weeks. But for some professional athletes in the triathlon, it takes even longer than that. It might take 3 to 6 months. So it's a long process. But metabolically, the metabolic change occurs very quickly. So if we were to test you within 4 or 5 days, we'd say, gosh, you're fat adapted. But there's still many, many changes that have to happen in the body for you to become fully adapted in terms of your performance. And sorry, one of the things that happens when you adapt to a fat diet is you get your sugar addiction becomes apparent. And so a lot of people's performance goes down as they adapt to a high-fat diet because they've removed sugar and their sugar addiction is becoming an issue. So they get withdrawal symptoms and they feel terrible. And I noticed that there was a guy who really went after me. He was quite a good walker, professional walker from Canada. And he was on a low-carb trial. He didn't want to be on the low-carb diet. And he complained bitterly. And then the first thing he wanted to do coming off the low-carb diet was to eat pizzas and drink his Cokes again. So that was the sugar addiction coming through. No wonder he didn't do well on the diet, because he didn't understand that the sugar addiction was the reason why he did badly on the low-carb diet.
It's crazy. Wow, thanks, Prof. So our next question is from Graham. Graham is currently online watching us. So Graham asked, what is your perspective on the carnivore diet for healing? Now, he had a whole list, Prof. It's like obesity, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, aging, mental health, depression. In general, he just wanted to know as well, what do you foresee any side effects on the carnivore diet in the future?
Yeah, thanks, Graham. I think you've read out the list that most of us would agree is what happens when you go on the low carb diet. And for some people, the carnivore diet is even better. I understand. I'm largely a carnivore now. I do have a little bit of vegetables, but no fruit, but a tiny, tiny, tiny amount of vegetables. And what I've learned through the work of people like Sean Baker in the United States, by the way, Sean's mother is South African, so there's a connection there. He has pushed the carnivore diet religiously for the last 4 or 5 years. And he's an amazing athlete in his mid-50s, and he's just a world-class athlete, and he looks magnificent. And he does not eat any vegetables. And when I saw that, I thought, but no, surely you need vegetables for these vitamins. And then I learned that you actually don't, that a well-balanced carnivore diet can provide you all the vitamins and minerals that you need. So the benefit of the carnivore diet is specific for a special group of people, and they are people who have an allergy to some chemicals that are present in vegetables and perhaps fruits. And the point about allergic reactions is that you just have to have a trace of the protein that's causing the problem, the chemical that's causing the problem. You only have to have a trace of it in the diet, and then you get very sick. And the person who has pushed it as well is Jordan Peterson's daughter, Mihaly. Jordan Peterson is a gentle genius, a psychologist who's written some fabulous books, and I would advise everyone to read them. And his daughter, he had to live with a daughter who was severely ill. She was so ill by the age of 16 that she was considering whether her life was worth continuing. She had autoimmune disease, particularly juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. She'd had 2 joints replaced, surgically replaced, because at that age they'd been destroyed by the disease. And eventually she said, well, I can't, there's nothing else I can do. I might as well just change my diet. And she read about the carnivore diet, and she went on the carnivore diet. She completely healed herself, and now she's a mother with a child, at least one child. Whereas before she was bedridden and hopeless. Now she's very productive, a human being. And she describes that it was the carnivore diet. And Sean Baker reports many people with gut disease like ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease, which are considered to be autoimmune diseases that are untreatable, and that the only treatment is removing parts of the bowel. And these people have been cured by going on the carnivore diet because they've excluded this one protein in the diet that's coming from somewhere that we don't yet know where it's coming from, but it's coming from the vegetable part of the diet, not the meat part of the diet. So I think a carnivore diet is very, very successful. It's for if you're insulin resistant and you've got any of the problems that are caused by insulin resistance, it's a perfect diet. But it's mandatory if you have an autoimmune disease like rheumatoid arthritis, ulcerative colitis. You have to try this diet. And in time, in fact, I think there are clinical trials at last of the carnivore diet, because the reason they aren't funded is another reason why I'll be talking at the 10th anniversary, is that it's the undone science that my son talks about. This is science that won't be done because someone's going to lose money if we prove it. If we prove the carnivore diet works, some of the medications for autoimmune disease are the most expensive medications on the planet. So someone's going to lose money, and so they don't want that to be widely known.
Fantastic. Thank you, Prof. So while I am on our live here on my other screen, Anna has a very interesting question. She goes, I'm wondering if Prof has any insight into the cause of red meat to make a young athlete have severe stomach and gut problem. He loves red meat, but he is incapacitated. He does eat other proteins without concern. His doc is ordering a sonar and some blood tests. Any thoughts on that, Prof?
Thanks, Anna. You know, the reason we have these Facebook Lives are because we can pick up the unusual stuff. And I'm always extremely keen when something comes up that you don't expect. So for the majority of people, red meat's perfectly safe and it produces a long life. However, one has to take those symptoms very seriously, those description. What I would do is just make sure it's the red meat and not something which goes with the red meat. That's the key. The test has to be you only give red meat. You give nothing else in the same meal and see what happens. And that will confirm that those symptoms are due to the red meat, if it's only the red meat that is being eaten. Then what could it be? Well, I've never heard it described. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Please understand, I absolutely accept what you're saying, because that's how I've made my career, by listening to people when they say something that sounds unusual. Those are the stories that are the most interesting. The usual stories are not all that interesting. The unusual is interesting. My point of view would be that if that was my child, I would first test, okay, let's try meat. Is it all cuts of meat? Is it always red meat, or what about chicken, etc.? And then I would try to show that there has to be something in the red meat. And then I would go and read up and find the experts to see what could it possibly be in the red meat. And slowly try to see if you can come down to the one protein or the few proteins that are causing the problem. And then you've made a huge advance, because now you can say this protein is toxic to some people. It's not the red meat, it's something in the red meat that is causing the problem. And then you've made the case. So that's what I would do. And obviously the treatment is avoid red meat. And that's a pity, because it's a very healthy food. But there are many other options. There's pork and there's chicken and there's fish. And you can be incredibly healthy on a carnivore diet without having to eat red meat. I would be interested in offal. Does offal cause the problem? Does liver cause the problem? And I would switch the diet towards those sorts of things, a more offal-based diet, because that will bring you all the other nutrients that you need. And I'd also check, is it heart muscle that causes it, or is it skeletal muscle? Because heart and skeletal muscle are slightly different. They have slightly different proteins. And it may be that heart or tongue doesn't cause it, whereas it's specific to skeletal muscle meat. So I think that, Anna, you've got a great opportunity to advance medicine and discover what's the problem, how's it caused, and the solution. And then one can ask, well, how widespread is this? There are a lot of vegetarians who tell me that they can't eat meat, and it may well be that they have this other condition, and they've got the same condition, they've learned they just can't tolerate meat. And then we can start looking into finding out what actually is the real cause within the meat itself. So thanks, Anna, for a great question.
Fantastic. Thank you, Prof. So from Caroline, she says, I use the Banting pocketbook to keep myself in check every day. Please explain why a boiled chicken egg has more carbs than fried, poached, or omelette, assuming scrambled egg is a high because of added milk or cream.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so funny, because I don't know if I do have the book here. Yes, I've got the Banting Pocket Guide. I think that's the one you're talking about. I'll have to go and look at it. I think that's a historical error. It has to be wrong. I mean, it can't be right. If you take the egg and you fry it, or you're not adding sugar or carbohydrates when you fry it. And quite correct. When you make scrambled eggs, you're going to add milk, so that's going to increase it. But if you add cream, you won't increase the carbohydrate content. So, but I'll look at this a little bit later. But it can't be a huge amount increase in the carbohydrate intake. So I would treat that as probably erroneous, and it doesn't make logical sense. And so if we can't really explain it logically, I'd have to go back and look at where were the data from. And in any case, it's not going to be many more grams added. And so it will probably still be within your within the safe zone of your carbohydrate intake. So I'm going to quickly look and see if I can see what this is. But do carry on with the questions.
Fantastic. From Sally, we've got, hi, Prof. Greetings from Sydney. Can you elaborate on carbs and its cautiousness of OA of the knees? I don't know what's OA.
Yeah, osteoarthritis. That's the arthritic condition of the knees.
Yes.
Sorry, can you just repeat that?
So if he wants to know, can you elaborate on the carbs and its causation? Oh my Lord, my words. Causation of OA on the knees.
Okay, well, I think that there's good evidence that there is destruction. Insulin causes destruction of articular cartilage, and it looks like a lot of orthopedic surgeons are going out of business because the patients they want to operate on are going on the low carb diet, and all of a sudden their knees are much better. So yes, there's very good evidence that that a high carbohydrate diet in people who are insulin resistant makes their arthritis worse. And so if you do have osteoarthritis, the key is to lose weight. That helps with the diet, but to remove the insulin, keep the insulin low. And Belinda Fettke and her husband are both Tasmanians, and they've written widely on this problem of osteoarthritis and the high carbohydrate diet. So you might want to check up on the Fettke's websites. And they've been very strong on promoting this diet for the treatment of osteoarthritis.
Wow, thanks, Prof. So Summer, again, yeah, Summer just reading here from our live feed. Summer has a question. Any thoughts on how to raise testosterone levels in menopause? Currently lifting heavy, exercising, and carnivore. Is this enough? Definitely enough protein and fat.
Yeah, I definitely think so. You know, I'm not a great advocate for taking added testosterone. So that's the other option. And I'm not an advocate for that because I don't think we have long-term clinical trials. And I just have a suspicion that it might be long-term not so good. But again, it's only a suspicion, and I personally wouldn't use it. So outside of that, I think you have to go on the carnivore diet and lift weights. And, you know, when you look at people in their 80s, 70s and 80s who are on the diet, they're looking pretty good. And they probably got plenty of testosterone, or enough that you need. Because remember, it's also how your muscles respond to the testosterone. So, for example, my great friend Bruce Fordyce always laughed, and he'd go like this with tiny little muscles. And he said, you see what my heavy training with the weights. And of course, he was a runner, what it's done. And he just didn't have the receptors in the muscle to make big muscles. His muscles were designed for endurance, not for high intensity strength development. So we're all different. And this is one of the problems with trying to ban athletes who've got too much testosterone in their bloodstream. The problem is it's not the testosterone, it's how the testosterone acts on the muscles. If the muscles don't respond to the testosterone, then it doesn't help have all that testosterone. And that's kind of one of the things that they forget about. So remember that the world's strongest men who use steroids, they also have muscles that respond to those steroids. And so if you don't have muscles that will respond to this extra testosterone, they won't make the difference. And I think in the long term, eating the carnivore diet and doing your strength training and keeping your muscle mass is key. That's clearly, as you get older, we all came from the era when we were promoting lots of long distance running, which is fantastic. But ultimately, you've got to keep your muscle mass, and you don't do that by running. You do that by weightlifting. So that's what's important as you get older. Keep your muscle mass, and the diet that you're following is ideal, and the weights are also important. So thanks, Summer, for that.
Fantastic. So from Brenda, we've got a question. What is the best way of doing low carb, high fat if you get uric acid kidney stones and have gallstones? She's on a Prenorol, which giving me, what is she saying? She's got muscle pain and stiffness and cramps due to the medication that she's on. I feel great and lost weight on the low carb, high fat, but really do not want to go through kidney stones removal or a gallbladder attack again. And I
Yeah.
really do want to have it removed. If I can, do, what do I really know? It was, she's doing well on the low carb, high fat, losing weight, so much energy, but no pain. And then wham, kidney stones. She would just like to know, what is your thoughts on that?
Okay, so the gallstones, let's talk about the gallstones first. So the gallstones are definitely related to the high carbohydrate diet, not to the high fat diet. So I can put your mind at rest for that. The risk factor for gallstones is the high carbohydrate diet. And the reason it happens, and the reason why they appear when you go onto the high fat diet, is that the gallbladder stops working when you're eating a high carbohydrate diet. So instead of expelling the bile, the bile sits in the gallbladder and it forms these stones. And it's there because you need fat to get the gallbladder to contract. So if you're not eating a fatty diet, your gallbladder is not doing its job. Now, unfortunately, when you change to the high fat diet with stones in the gallbladder, all of a sudden the gallbladder wakes up and it starts expelling the stones. And that's when you have these attacks. And then you blame the dietary change, but it's not really that. It's the previous diet that laid down the gallstones. So I think I'm fairly comfortable to say that if you have your gallbladder removed, you shouldn't have future gallstones if you are eating the high fat diet. The kidney stones are a little bit more of a problem because, again, I've not seen them linked to a high fat diet. But I have seen them linked to diets that are high in certain vegetables, like I think spinach has quite a lot of oxalates, and often that's the stones that are the problem. So the calcium oxalate stones, and there are many causes of calcium oxalate stones, and they are excruciatingly painful, absolutely. But I'm not sure that we can relate them to the diet, the carnivore or low carb diet. I'd have to check up on that, but I've not seen any linkage. I think that would be also a residual from other dietary factors. So I think what you need to do is look at where is oxalate in the diet and maybe cut out some of those foods that contain high concentrations of oxalates.
Thanks, Prof. Also, yeah, on the screen, Leonie asked, so her son is doing his first marathon. What would you advise him to eat before he goes on?
Yeah, the question is, what's he normally eating? If he's normally eating a high carbohydrate diet, he has to stick to that. But in the long term, I wouldn't prescribe that diet. I'd prescribe a high fat diet or a low carb diet. And if you're a high carb athlete, you will need to take a substantial amount of carbohydrate during the race, particularly after about 30 kilometers. So after about 30 kilometers, you'd probably need 30 grams of carbs an hour to make sure that your blood glucose doesn't fall. That's not much. That's quite easy to do. But the cutoff is usually at about 30 kilometers. That's when you need to start eating more carbs. However, again, the fatigue is related to training. And the reason why people slow down after 30 kilometers is not because they're not eating carbs. It's usually because they're simply not trained. And that's the key. The training is what gets you through the marathon, not the nutrition. And it's very important to make that point. Because when athletes are trying to break 4 hours, so they're not highly trained, they don't break the 4 hours and they come and say, oh, well, it's because I didn't eat enough carbs before or during. That's nonsense. You didn't train. Get out and train. If you want to run a faster marathon, you need to train. So that's what I'd say for that. So on the other hand, I would suggest that get your son to change to a low carbohydrate eating pattern because it's much better in the long term for his long-term health. And if he's eating a low carb diet, then he only needs 10 grams of carbs an hour. It's trivial amounts. So that's the difference. And if you don't eat anything else. And this idea that you've got to load up on carbs the night before, that's also nonsense. That doesn't help anything, as we've shown.
Thanks, Prof. So we've got another interesting question here from Mait. She says she just wants your opinion regarding sweetness, the xylitols. She is quite happy cutting out the sugar, but she just wants your opinion for an 80-year-old father and a 10-year-old son. What is your...
That's fantastic. At 80 years, I'm still trying to get healthier.
Yes.
I don't think one should take sweeteners because they're chemicals that are not normal. Humans were not exposed to these chemicals. And so we have no reason for needing them. It's just for the sweetness, and you don't need sweetness. The key to weight control is you've got to get rid of your cravings. And the cravings are driven by sugar and carbs. And so as long as you're taking sweeteners, you are still at risk of continuing with your sugar addiction. And I just tell people, unfortunately, you've got to get rid of the sweet taste. You have to start to like no sweetness in the diet. And it's amazing what that does, because that means then you can restrict your foods to very few. And that's what makes weight control so easy. You can just start eating the nutrient-dense foods that are full of the nutrients that your body needs for health, and got none of the rubbish that you don't need, which is put there by the food industry to addict you. So that's what you want to get rid of, those addictions, and the addictions are sweet related. So as long as you're taking xylitol, you're still on the addiction phase. So that's why I just tell people, get rid of it, because in the long term, it's like telling an alcoholic they can have one drink a day. It doesn't work. Eventually it becomes many more drinks a day. It's the same with sweeteners. Eventually you go back to sugar, and eventually you're back to 3 or 4 teaspoons of sugar in your tea.
Thanks, Prof. So Virginia asked, she said, hi, I'm a 63-year-old. I live in South Africa, work in the UK. I'm generally a healthy person. I have high blood pressure for many years and on blood pressure tablets and water tablets. I have now been told I am pre-diabetic. I am suffering with terrible pain in my ankles, feet, lower legs at night. I have to shuffle when I get up, and it is so sore and painful. I am not one for chemicals, therefore try to avoid any tablets. I would prefer to find a healthier way. What would your suggestion be, please?
Virginia, I loved your comments, and I loved what you said, because we can make your life completely different. And you're obviously at the point where you've had enough. You've gone through allopathic medicine and it's failed you. And that's the reality. Allopathic medicine cannot manage chronic disease because it doesn't get to the cause. When I was in medicine, taught in medicine in the 1970s, we were told, find the cause. Why is the patient coming to you today? What's the cause? Now that's gone. Now it's, what's the diagnosis and what's the treatment? No questioning, what can we do to help this patient? And that's because we've got this pharmacological approach to medicine, and we don't understand that nutrition, all your symptoms are nutritionally based, every single one of them. So if you're not told that by allopathic medicine, they're not going to help you. So the moment you said you had high blood pressure, I said, okay, you're insulin resistant. That's fine. And you're eating too much carbs. And then you said you're retaining water, which is another classic feature of insulin resistance. And then you said you have these pains in your limbs. That's probably peripheral neuropathy, which is a diabetic state. And then you eventually said you're pre-diabetic. I'll assure you that if I was to examine you and do the proper blood tests, we'd show that you're frankly diabetic. Now, that's good news. It's not bad news. It's good news, because you're at the lowest point now. You're only going to get better. From now on, your symptoms are going to get better. And all we need you to do is to declare carbohydrates absolutely forbidden. And you need to get your diet down to 25 grams of carbohydrate or less a day. That's it. And you will be absolutely astonished at the results, the response. All the symptoms that you describe will go away progressively. So that's what you need. And, perhaps go to the Noakes Foundation website and see if you can find a doctor in your area who prescribes a low carbohydrate lifestyle. But what you have to learn is that you have to be 100% strict. You've got to get your carbs below 25 grams a day. If you don't, if it's 26 grams or 27 grams, I take no responsibility for the outcome. Okay. If it's 24 grams, I take full responsibility for the outcome.
On the
But
dot.
people don't understand that the cutoff is absolute. And if you're on the wrong side of the cutoff, you're just going to get worse. But if you're on the right side, every day you will be getting better. So you definitely need a low carb doctor who's going to prescribe the low carb diet and is going to get you off your medications in time. Not immediately, but in time. And that will show you that you are improving, that your health's improving. I wondered if you're putting on a statin, if you're on a statin, that could also cause some of those symptoms that you describe. The statin is the cholesterol lowering drug because it's unusual for a doctor not to prescribe a statin with the low blood pressure lowering medications. They usually go together. And again, they don't address the problem. The problem is the glucose is destroying your nerves, and that's why you're getting these peripheral pains. But as long as the glucose is high, it's not going to help. And the statin doesn't do anything for it. And the high blood pressure medication doesn't do anything for it either. In fact, statins worsen diabetes and should not be prescribed for people who are diabetic, which is the ultimate irony, because diabetes is the biggest cause of arterial disease, and statins make diabetes worse. So how can a statin help you treat your heart disease? So that's my point. But Virginia, let me again give you the hope that you're going to, in 2 or 3 years' time, I hope you'll come back on Facebook and say, thank you for saving my life. And because that's what will happen if you follow the advice.
Thanks, Prof. Anthony also had this question about the statin. So you kind of did 2-for-1 special there right now, answering the statin and commenting on Virginia's post. I just want to read you a quick comment here from Summer that you just answered about the testosterone. She says, I really wish I knew about this 40 years ago. Had alterating scoliosis, yours big words. Yes. Ileostomy since 1989. If I could go back now and turn the clock around, she would definitely do that. All her incredible uncurable autoimmune ongoing issues are being resolved now by the carnivore diet.
Yeah.
So she is obsessed with lifting weight. She's doing very good, and she's 56. 56, yes. Oh, I quickly do my Afrikaans and change around.
Oh, of course. No, well, you got it right.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
well
so that's
done.
fantastic.
Well done, Summer. And thanks for confirming that autoimmune disease is treatable. It's not a chronic progressive disease. It can be treated. But again, got to find the cause and not just accept that it's a lack of some drug that the pharmaceutical companies provide. That's not the cause of autoimmune disease, which is what the myth they try to teach you. Oh, you're lacking our pills. Once you get your pills, you'll get better, but you don't get better. They don't reverse because they're not addressing the cause.
Wow. So from Emma as well, Prof, she would like to know a little bit about fasting. So her question here is, she would like to know fasting, long periods of fasting with women with body fat, and then the difference if you don't have a lot of body fat, what would be the fasting periods?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So intermittent fasting is the one that's best studied and is most appropriate. Most people do this. So they eat in a 6 to 8 hour window each day. So they'll eat lunch and dinner, for example, and they'll put all their calories into those 2 meals. And then for the rest of the day, they won't eat. And that's the one that is probably the easiest to do. However, if you want to fast for longer, it's very clear that a 3-day fast that has different benefits. It does produce different changes that reprograms the immune system, it seems. So, but I don't think that's something that one should do repetitively and very often. I haven't seen the data on that one. So my advice is that if you are overweight, then you could do intermittent fasting. You must do intermittent fasting, and you could do 1 day of or whole day fasting and see how you respond to that. My great friend Jason Fung, he treats his diabetics with fasting immediately. They start fasting on day 1 because he says it's much easier to get someone not to eat than to try to teach them what to eat initially. So they start their weight loss by fasting, and then they start looking at the diet and producing the changes that are required. So I think you have to find what appeals to you and what is doable. The big point is that if you're carbohydrate adapted, you can't fast for very long because you get so hungry. So the fact that you can fast tells me that you're already metabolically much healthier and you've got control of your cravings. So already the fact that you are wanting to fast tells me you're already 90% there. You're already made a huge progress. And then whether you're going to do intermittent fasting or day-long fasting on some days, I'm not sure that it makes much difference. I think if you're fasting for 12 to 14 hours a day, that's probably for most people the easiest and the most productive. Extending it into 2 or 3 days may help occasionally, but it's not something that I think you should be doing regularly.
Wow. Awesome. Thanks, Prof. So I think this is our last question. Time has flown. It has been so much fun. I
Yes,
was
indeed.
a little bit nervous. I think the sweating has gone away, but it was quite fun. So just from one more, Sarah asked, she said she is she finished certificate in nutrition advisory. She finished her course from a nutrition network in December. And she feels a little dismotivated. She's looking for some advice from Prof, asking how would you go about trying to recruit people to do the low carb lifestyle. She's looking for some guidelines on getting people on board to join her in this low carb lifestyle. So she asked if Prof has any suggestions or guidelines towards that.
Yeah, Sarah, I can see it's a difficult thing because the society is so against the low carbohydrate diet. I'm not sure which city you're in, but I would try to link up with a doctor who is prescribing the low carb diet because the doctors are not really good at prescribing diets. And I would work in a team. You need to get into a team where there's a low carb group and use your expertise in that way. I know that sounds, because it's very difficult to get to patients. How do you get to patients who don't know anything about the low carb diet and want to do it? I think you have to get the patient has to make the first step and go to look for help. And then they're ready to be changed. And so the first port of call would be the doctor. So if I were you, I would be visiting doctors in your area and physiotherapists, other people, and say, look, I have the special training and I can help you in managing these conditions. For example, we've talked today about osteoarthritis. Physiotherapists don't treat osteoarthritis by changing the diets, but that might be a good way of introducing yourself to a new area for the physiotherapists. And then the doctors who are, you need to find a doctor who wants to promote the low carbohydrate diet because he or she has seen how successful it is. I think so. My point is go and find the professionals and link up with the ones who have the same philosophy as you have. You can't put up a board on the street and expect the low carb people coming to ask for a low carb diet. The other thing is schools. Go to the schools, see what, because they need help. And you could tell them the benefits of the low carb diet for children who, or maturing adults who are having trouble gaining weight. I mean, that has to be a massive problem in most schools. So one of the ways may be to start putting together talks and becoming known as a person who gives these talks, because schools always needing people to talk, and you're going to find people who agree with you and who want to use your services. So I think you have to market yourself first to the doctors, the physiotherapists. Don't think the nutritionists will really listen to you, but then to the schools and to the parents, and put together a talk about why do we have so much diabetes? Why do we have so much obesity? Because when I think of it, which population is really struggling, I think it's young women who are struggling to control their weight, and they don't understand that it's actually very easy if they just go the low carb diet. And the parents must be worried about their children who are putting on weight now. It gets worse with each generation. And so that would be the markets that I would look for. And I would think you need just to sell yourself, but start slowly. Yeah, the first talk I ever gave was to a group of athletes at a university running club. I started with running clubs. And then I got to write the book and then did other things. But you start at the grassroots. That's where you need to start. And work with, I mean, you can always go to sports clubs as well, because they also need advice. And they're always looking for speakers. So that's what you need to do. And I know you're highly talented and very, very skilled in what you do, Sarah. So I know you can sell yourself to the public. But that's what it is. Start at the grassroots. Don't start with the patients. Start with talking about good, healthy nutrition, because that affects everyone. It's not just the patients who have got diabetes and obesity. That's what I would do. And again, I say that's how I started. I had my slides, which were terrible. I mean, I can't even think about how awful they were. And I'm sure the talks were atrocious. And I've given some terrible speeches in my life, but you only learn. You know, every bad is a good learning process. And then eventually you'll get the skills and you'll get known. And then you just keep pushing it from there.
Prof, thank you so much. We had so much fun. This live was awesome. Thank you everyone for joining. We are very excited about the 18th. I can't wait. I can't wait. So for those who still want some tickets, please info@thenoakesfoundation.org. Come and just send me an email. We will hook you up in the lingual as they use. Prof, you must have a fantastic day. Thanks again. We'll see you next month.
Thanks, Marita. Can I put in the last word for the 18th? I really have put a lot of effort in it. I've really enjoyed it. There's a lot of humor. There's a lot of humor, and it's a lot of insights, which, you know, I didn't get until I went back and prepared this talk.
Yes, it's amazing. But
yeah,
like you said, Prof, 10 years. 10 years is a long time. I mean,
yeah,
people grow up in 10 years. Children become adults in 10 years. It's crazy. So
and remember, this is from 65 to 75 for me.
Yeah. After retirement age.
The other end of life. So yes. I promise you, you don't want to miss this talk. And you know, I've made many very terrible speeches, but this is going to be one of the very, very best. I can promise you that.
We can't wait, Prof. Thank you again. Have a fantastic afternoon. And thank you everyone for joining. All right. Bye.
Bye. Bye.